we're going to get started. Come on in, have a seat. Before we get started, I'd just like to ask by a show of hands, how many of you are in a school district? Okay, kind of work for a school district. Oh, okay, all right. Okay, how many in higher ed? Okay, great, thanks. All right, let's get to it. My name is Bill Dwyer. A little bit background about me. I got a couple of undergraduate degrees. I got my master's in aero and astro from MIT, so yes, I am a rocket scientist. I've started out in the industry doing computational fluid dynamics, which is kind of interesting because I guess my career has kind of come full circle because now I was doing data visualizations back on, Cray supercomputers and whatnot, and now we're doing data visualizations basically at the same speed though on laptops and things like that, which is kind of neat. Did some time magazine publishing, now at CustomTech software, and I'm also a school board member, my local school district on Long Island. I've been a board member I'm in my 9th year on the board.
Hi, I'm Lee Feinberg. Kind of like Bill, I guess I have a bit of a nerd engineering background. I worked at Bell Labs for the first 8 years of my out-of-school career. Got a patent in communications, which was pretty cool. I was actually a Tableau customer in the early days, 2009, and then we actually became the largest global installation of Tableau, which by today's standards is tiny, but back then it was a pretty big deal. And then during that time, I started the New York and New Jersey Tableau user groups, which I ran for 8.5 years. And that's actually where Bill and I got to know each other. So if you kind of get an interesting vibe, we've actually been friends for a really long time before we started working together on this project. So you'll see a little bit of playfulness between us that might not be as common as you would see in this kind of scenario. I'm also a Tableau ambassador and actually got into working with data by accident. I won't go into the story behind it, but if anybody wants to hear it later, I'm happy to chat about it.
Yeah, so that's the value of the user groups, because that's how we met. A little bit about our companies. So CustomTech, we are an exclusive channel partner for Infinite Campus. All right, Infinite Campus is a major student information system. So we sell, service, and support it. As part of that role, though, we also develop some custom products, and what you'll see is something that we've developed and put into it. Now, what we did, though, could be done for other student information systems as well. It's just that I only have the one I work with to show you. And been a Tableau reseller partner since 2009. We're actually one of the oldest, longest standing partners of Tableau. We got in right in the beginning.
Yeah, and so my company is called Decision Viz. And the thing that we really focus on is, even though we've worked in Tableau for a really long time, and we're also a Tableau partner, which is odd, you don't see two partners always working together either, is not worrying so much about Tableau, the technology, but looking at it as a communications platform. So just like you might use Microsoft Word to do your writing, we can use Tableau to do your writing, but visually. So we're trying to solve the problem that people come across these days in a bit of a different way. And part of that is a program we have called Design to Act, which is all about data literacy. You've probably heard a lot about data literacy this week. If you were in the keynote on, I guess, Wednesday, you heard Adam talk about that quite a bit. And I've been a partner, not quite as long as Bill, but since 2012.
Okay, and I'd like to just take a second to kind of give the perspective on what we mean by the title, Data Challenge K-12 Data Consumers. So, a little background, the data consumers we're really talking about are your staff, your parents, and your students, people that will benefit from looking at the information you're presenting in your dashboards. The whole idea is school districts and schools and education, we're collecting more and more data every day and needing to report on it. So the whole idea is that you need to be able to simplify that process. At the same time, every school district wants to report information their own way. And so it needs to be an extensible solution, something you give them and then they can build their own. The real challenge, though, is that school districts, being the government institutions that they are pretty slow to evolve. And so while the data requirements have really grown, the skill sets for the people working with it really haven't grown or advanced as quickly as it should have. So that's what we're doing. We're addressing these by trying to make it as simple as possible for school districts to access and utilize the dashboards, as well as administering them from the data administration side of things, you'll see. Because then when you do that, school districts do have structures in place for rolling out products, and we're just trying to make this just like one of those products. So why put it into the student information system? Really familiarity of the interface. It's a product that everyone in the district should be using daily, and so it lowers the barriers to utilization. Again, and then when you combine Tableau with it, Tableau, again, obviously the interactive dashboards, and the ability for them to create their own content pretty easily. And then by embedding it, it allows us to take data from the SIS, like filter settings and things like that, and pass it into the dashboard. And then from Tableau, we can take things like information, how the user is interacting with the viz, and send it back out to the student information to do work on that side of the product. And we're going to kind of touch on things at multiple levels here. We'll do the high level. We'll do some of the talk about the concepts of how to create and put good dashboards in. Then we'll also go over some of the technical details on how we did it for any of you nerds in the room that want to see, talk about how to embed applications.
Hey, Bill, I'm wondering, just in case, maybe you want to explain what embedding means or make sure everybody knows?
Well, we're going to get there with the foundation. And you guys see a good lead in right there. So here's our agenda. The foundation is, putting Tableau into another application, so that really our goal was to make allow the end users not even know they're using Tableau, the data consumer, the teacher, the principal who's clicking on it. They just want to know, they just want to get at the information. And so for the technical part, everything that we did, we just use all of the help that Tableau makes available to you. I put these URLs in here just so that you have them in the slides. If you look, JavaScript API page is great. It provides samples that you can kind of look under the hood to see what they're doing, and at the same time, full reference of all of the calls, how to use them, how to make them, things like that. Everything you need to know is there. Same goes for the REST API. Again, tons and tons of information here. And again, the reference page allows for looking at all of the methods available. And then finally, the web data connector stuff is all available from GitHub. Again, we just figured it all out by looking at those resources.
Anybody here ever worked with any of those aspects of Tableau? One person. What have you done?
We use the JavaScript as an embed.
Great.
So this is how the APIs will help you out. The JavaScript is really a front-end kind of control for working with your dashboard in the embedded application, all right? So it allows you to manipulate filters, parameters, things like that. Listen to marks, again, that's where, again, you're watching what your user is doing with the data and reacting to it appropriately. REST API is more for the back end. We use it for account management because everyone who has access to these must have an account on the Tableau server. And the account, the username needs to match their username in the student information system. So we have a nightly process that runs and basically looks at all the users in the student information system and makes sure that they have an account on the Tableau server. And it logs all that. We've also built an automated library installer. We provide a whole lot of content to our clients. And so we've got, using a REST API, we can publish a whole bunch of dashboards right out to there. It also embeds the stuff in, and versioning. So one of the things we've also done is versioned all the content in our library now, so that when we update the library, the installer will look. If it's new content, it'll add it. If it's something that's been modified, it'll update it. If it's an existing dashboard, it hasn't changed, it just leaves it alone. And then the Web Data Connector API, we built the Web Data Connector to allow districts to pull data directly from the student information system using its general built-in data querying utility to bring it in as a data set, because again, the deficit of technical skills often in school districts often manifests itself in people not being really well versed in relational databases. Infinite Campus runs on a Microsoft SQL Server with over 2,500 tables. And so this is a way to help, especially smaller school districts, get at the data. Quick background, we've been working on this a long time. I started playing around with this in 2012. I think it was Tableau version 5, as a matter of fact. And we embedded, and we started adding more and more, and you can see my versioning. We didn't get to a 1.0 for about 5 years, because it kind of play. It was also a side project. I actually had another day job, and this is just kind of what I did for fun at work. But then 1.0, we had our first big release, and then a whole bunch of incremental things. Realized the Web Data Connector needed to be built, so that was a big effort. And then you see there's a break, because at that point we realized we had a neat product, but it just needed to be polished. And so that's what 2.0 is. It's the first one to really consider a real product. So, Lee, we're going to talk about the data literacy mindset. Yeah. So I'm going to jump into the site and show you what our early warning system that we had built and have been using looked like this. Okay, I'm in Infinite Campus. I click on a link, it'll bring up the early warning system. So we built this. It took a long time, but you know, what's it show? It shows count of measures of a student's number of failing grades. Sorry if I'm blocking your views here. Behavior events and attendance events. And you can get I'm going to have to stand up here because I need to do sorting and stuff like that. You can do sorting, you know, so if I want to see the overall, right, I can sort here.
Oh, geez.
All right, and if I wanted to sort by any of these columns, I can drill down to see the grades.
Really?
And we thought this was
like
pretty
an
good, right, Lee?
A plus, yeah. Okay.
Yeah?
That's good, I guess.
What do you think?
I don't know. Keep going.
Well, and then, so I can, if I want to like change the weighting, let's say I don't have any course grades yet, I can set that to 0. And it does a weighted average of these rankings. And now you can see I've got all new rankings, and so now I can resort them here. All right, that's pretty cool, right?
So you've used like every feature you could?
What's that?
You used like every feature you could, pretty much?
Yeah, and then we can drill down. We can see grades if you want, right? And we can see the underlying failing grades, things like that. Pretty cool, no?
It's a lot.
If I want to see how a student did, I just click the student, and I can see their posted grades for that term and highlight the failures, right?
I'm a bit speechless right now.
All right, well, this is kind of why I engaged with Lee, because we had a cool product, but our presentation was lacking. So Lee, I'm going to jump back in.
Yeah, so as Bill was saying, when he showed this to me, we kind of thought about where he wanted to take the product to the next level, kind of realized there was something big that they had to deal with. And some of you might have seen this. It's a pretty famous idea that's been around the technology industry for a long time. And this is kind of like the life cycle of a product. And what Bill was going through in the early stages of launching his product was you had these innovators and early adopters who basically are like, I love this product and I will take it however you can give it to me. I don't care if it's not perfect. I'll work through it even if it's complicated because I'm willing to do that. But when you want to get to a lot of people, when you really want your any kind of product to have that much more mass appeal, and you want to get to these next layers, that two big sections in the center there, you need to jump over what they call the chasm, and that's kind of Bill was in this chasm now, and the question is how do you cross the chasm? And you have to basically to do that, you have to do something pretty differently than how you've done all your work before, because you fundamentally need to change your approach to what the market looks like. And in Bill's case, they had all that technology. They used all the technology of Tableau, and they had all that fine-tuned, but what they needed to do was start thinking it more from the customer's view, the user's view, the teacher's view, the administrators, and so on. And part of that, what we talked about, and what my company brought to it, is a structure. Is when you want to make that kind of a change, you can't just say, oh, let's just do something different. You need some kind of approach. And so we have a framework that we call Astral. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but basically, what it starts with is this idea of don't worry about the data, because a lot of people, and Bill, I think you kind of said you admit to doing this, is like, hey, this is great, I can connect to the data, I've got Tableau, I'll make all these charts and dashboards, right, and make them interactive and all that. But what we do is reverse that. And we want to find out is, what's really the use behind that? How will a teacher use that information? How will an administrator use it? What are they trying to find out about that? And then you can figure out how to show it, what the data should look like, and so on. And that's really the idea here, is we want to get what we call the autobiography, is finding out what Bill's story is, finding out what his customer's story is, and bringing that together. That's the key point. And as you go through these steps, you'll see that the one before the red line called render is actually then when you can go and put something into Tableau. We're not going to talk about these last ones right now because they might come up a little bit later at the end. So when we get, and I mentioned this term data literacy before, and it's I think a little bit of maybe a loaded term right now because it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. The way I talk about it is, and maybe you guys will appreciate this, coming from the education world, to me, literacy is writing and reading. And then the question is, how does that translate from the world we're used to of writing to the visual world of writing? So I'll give you a couple examples here. So imagine that I teach you every feature and function of Microsoft Word. I send you training, and I don't know why anybody would necessarily want to have that, but let's just imagine you did. And you're done, but I actually don't teach you anything about language. I don't teach you anything about grammar, composition, how to put a story together. Microsoft Word isn't that helpful to you, right? And that's what happens in the world of working with something like Tableau, is someone gives you the tool. Here it is. They teach you all the features and functions of the tool, but they actually haven't taught you how to write with it. Okay? And that's what I talk about in terms of data literacy. How do you actually write with Tableau? How do you write visually? So we think about this as a communications problem, as I mentioned before. So imagine something else that comes into play. Imagine on Monday, you walked into work and you heard that the board of ed, or if you work in a corporation, the person in charge of all the finance says, you know what, just do all your finance work however you want. Forget about balance sheets and income statements and all that. Just do whatever you want. It would get pretty messy, right? It would be pretty hard for those groups to do their work well. And that's the problem, again, that we have here. You get an application like Tableau, and then everybody says, just do what you want. And so again, you have all these differences in how people work. The products look different. The output operates in a different way, and it's not a very consistent experience. And so that's one of the things that we talked about bringing into Bill's world and to his customers' world, is how do you bring something consistent into that so that there's a much better way to communicate. So I just want to I've talked about communication already. So if you jump down to this last item, the one idea I really want you to take away is what we call intent before content. So it goes back to this idea of, instead of taking your data and making a bunch of charts and dashboards and so on, you have to know the intent. What is the purpose? What is the message that you're trying to communicate visually? And once you know what that is, then you can figure out the best way to show it in something like Tableau. And then you can figure out what data you need. But you can't do it the other way around. You can't just start putting your data into charts, because you end up in the very similar situation that maybe some of you experienced and that Bill was trying to deal with as well. So how do you start to tackle this? Well, how many people here would consider themselves kind of analysts, analytical in some sense? So pretty much all of you, right? So when you're doing that, you tend to use thinking you're using your left side of the brain, right? It's where all the number crunching is going on. It's all about data, things like that. However, there's another piece to the story here, which is the right side of your brain is actually where creativity is, big picture thinking, and the visual processing part, okay? So the goal is, how do you bring both of those pieces together so that instead of just thinking about the numbers, you actually start to combine it with the visuals and the bigger ideas that you're trying to communicate. And so we're going to go through a little example here about how do you actually do that? How do you figure out what the bigger ideas are and move away from the data?
So we'll jump back into this again. And this is really how Lee and I sat down and started going through the rebuild of some of our stuff. So I'd sit down and say, well, you know, the goal of this is to allow administrators or guidance counselors to quickly identify students who are at risk of failing or need supports based upon 3 common measures that school districts use, right? How the kids are doing in the classes.
Okay, so Bill, wait a second. So you called this thing the early warning system.
Right.
Got to back up for me. What's the warning? What are you trying to figure out and be warned about?
Right, we're trying to identify students that are at risk of not having successful educational outcomes as early as possible.
Okay, it's pretty. What about students that aren't, there's a lot going on this screen. I see a lot of colors, reds, greens, yellows. I'm guessing the reds aren't good, the yellows are kind of okay, and the greens are probably doing all right. So
educators love stoplights.
Oh yeah.
They do.
A lot, and that's not just educators, by the way. It's kind of out there, so don't feel like you're alone. But so you said that you want those high risk, but so if do you also need to see all the students on there?
Well, you're not going to be as concerned about the students that aren't at high risk, so you're really going to, and it's normally taken as a top-down, you want to address those that are highest risk first. And so that's why when I demo to you, I show you the ability to sort and identify the highest risk students quickly.
Okay, but you might still want to be able to see the other ones.
Absolutely.
You're telling me. Okay, interesting. So just like, what is it that actually gets them to be at risk? Like, I see you've got all these sliders and formulas and stuff. How do you actually, what determines them to be at risk? Tell me a little bit about that.
Every district is going to define that their own way, because some districts may not have large behavior issues, but they will have attendance issues. Obviously, everyone's going to be concerned about the student's proficiency in the classroom, as indicated by the grades, and there could be other measures as well that we aren't even capturing here that a school district might be capturing data saying this is an important point.
Oh, okay, so you kind of need some flexibility, and it sounds like you just said there's stuff that you don't even have on here. So you're saying maybe you have 3, but maybe you need more?
Could be, yep.
Okay, interesting. And just curious, so is it all the same? Is like every school kind of the same? Every grade is the same? How does it?
No.
Is this like super complicated and it's like everybody has to have their exact own thing?
Well, this is based upon the research of a guy named Dr. Robert Belfons at Johns Hopkins University. And his whole idea is you're looking at secondary grades, which is 6 through 12, because that's really where the students start going through rotating class schedules, so they're no longer really with a teacher all day, and so you don't have that one individual who has that holistic view. But middle school, you'll probably look at things differently than you will at the high school. Absolutely.
Interesting, okay. So we'll stop there, but I want to give you the flavor that what we're trying to do is not worry about how to show the information. That's not the concern right now. I'm trying to really understand and kind of be in the same position as someone who's looking at this, trying to say, what's important to them? What's also important is what's not important, right? Because if it doesn't really matter to them, we either want to not show it at all, or if it needs to be shown, make sure it's not prominent, right? We want it available, but it shouldn't be the centerpiece of what's there. So we're trying to get under the hood here to really understand that, what we call that autobiography, to start framing out how we want to move forward. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about that? We'll just keep going. Yeah, so what we learned after this is the kind of conversation that takes multiple iterations. In this case, Bill and I had several of those with his team. Then we went out and actually talked to some of his customers directly, some of those early adopters, to hear even areas where they were struggling. And we came out with a couple of key learnings. This is not all of them, but we learned that, again, what he already said, they're looking at the highest risk right away. History was important because maybe this isn't a point, this is, right now all you saw was they're at risk. But what you didn't see here is, are they at risk just this one time in their entire school career? Is this a recurring pattern? What does that look like? So you don't really know. And is this one specific thing that happened? Or is it, that the students always got this across all their areas of risk? Or is it just one thing like grades? Or is it attendance, right? Can we bring that out? And also that the target levels are different, right? So as he was saying, at different grade levels or different schools and have you, that those targets are different. So you can't just say one time, this is how we want to set them. So we started to learn some of those things from him. And we're going to show you in a second kind of how that turned out. But there's one other thing that Bill mentioned before that became a very long and kind of detailed conversation that we had to address almost before we could even move forward. So I'll let you kind of go into this.
So, like I said, educators love red, yellow, green indicators, right? And how many of you in your school districts or your institutions sign off on, yes, our information systems and our websites are all ADA compliant, Americans with Disabilities Act, right? You all sign off on it saying, yeah, of course our site is whatever. This is about one of the worst color combinations you can use because one of the most prevalent forms of color blindness is red, yellow, green. And if you're you're yellow, green colorblind, red, yellow, yeah, you know what I mean. This is what it ends up looking like. They don't really see a whole lot in the way of differences. You can't even see the difference between the yellow and the green up there. So right away we had to rethink a lot of the colors that we use. Thankfully, actually, Tableau provides a color-blind palette, right? When you're building, there's actually a palette selectable that has color-blind, safe colors. So this is one of the things we had to do right away.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, does anybody here have color vision deficiency? That's what we're calling it. Anybody have that? Or does anybody work with anybody that has it or come across that issue? Yeah, what was your experience like with that? What happened?
We changed the colors.
But how did you find out? Like, how did it come up?
It was an administrator who didn't come down. One of his teachers working for him informed us. And I think he was a little shy about it. He came down and let us know. So I called. I said, we have, like you said, the colorblind color set for that. He came down and we're like, let's work this out. We can use it now. So we used red and blue.
I think what you said in there is really important is he was a little shy about, I don't know if you all heard that. He said that the administrator was a little shy about it and had sent their assistant to tell him that happened. And I think that could be common. So there may be people who are dealing with this that you may not know, especially if it's somebody you don't even touch frequently, get in touch with frequently. And so it's really important to think about how you're going to deal with that situation.
So let's jump into how we went about reworking things.
Yeah, so how this goes is, so after all those conversations with Bill and his customers and teams, we take a first stab at saying, hey, Bill, this is kind of what we thought about. So here, right, so Bill, this is good, we come in, you can choose your grades and you can choose the school district right away and you'll see those students who are at highest risk over here. And if we pick that student number one, we can click on that and right away we can go in and see how their risk is distributed and we can see that their total risk is, it's pretty high. And if we go into there, we can see over time exactly what's happening and we can see what those patterns look like. And I can pick for that student all the way out there. They can see that their grades over in towards the end of 2017 and get a really deep look at that. So what do you know?
So
what do you think about that?
This was good because it was a completely different approach. What was really most beneficial was that Lee wasn't a lifetime educator who had always been looking at the data the same way the whole time. He came in with a completely fresh perspective. So admittedly, I think we decided we were throwing too much information up at the screen. In an approach like this, we really did need to simplify it, but some of the concepts we were going after that came up here were actually very good. And so we went to a process of refining it.
So yeah, so some of the things we heard from that. By the way, I just want to tell you, in case you didn't pick up on it, I'm not sure how you guys do some of the things, but when we go into a client and do our demo, we don't say, click here, look at that chart, look at this scatter plot, look at these bar charts. We just go through it just like we would expect somebody to go through it as they're using it. And so that's how we want to present it to get them into that kind of flow. So one of the things we heard was that there's an issue if there's a lot of students. Might be some issues with scrolling, so we kind of changed the layout over here. I'd say the biggest one we heard is he said, well, we don't have 7 years worth of data. I think I just made that up when I first started talking to them. So he said, well, we really have 2 years, so we condensed that down, which kind of hit the mark. And then what that also let me able to do is it gave me some more space on the screen. So instead of having to hover over some areas where the information would pop up, we just said, oh, now if you click on it, it can show up on the screen and be there for you to look at, so you don't have to just hover over, and if you move your mouse, of course, it disappears. So we were able to simplify the design, but also provide more information that was needed. Now, the thing that you didn't see here, but you kind of had to imagine, is the first thing you actually see is just this part on the left. You saw his screen, it filled up right away. Here, it's you only see the students that are at risk, and then as you make your selections, things fill in on the screen. So it also helps focus your attention on exactly what they needed to see was, where are the students at risk? Because that's kind of what the feel is like, and you can see this is just all done. We just sketched this up in some software. Sometimes you can even just draw it out by hand, depending what you're trying to do. And then once you get this done, this basically becomes your guide to how you're actually going to eventually put it together in Tableau.
So let's look at the before and after. So this is where we started. This is where we ended, much simplified. We still have our 3 major measures of risk, but again, that can be extended now, and we've got some pretty chunky bars here that would shrink if we added additional. This is also something that our client districts could do themselves. Again, this is going to be the most general implementation, and then as you can see, when you select a student mark, it will show you more detail on that student, and I'll go into, you can see it by term. As far as showing multiple years, there's always, you have to worry about the issue of data security, and one of the areas where people are sometimes very sensitive about control is behavior data. Who's allowed to see behavior data on students? And so we opted to go with showing 1 year, because this is the way within the student information system we can also control who sees what data. And you'll see when we get into the live demo in the site how it works in actual implementation.
And just as you think, if you start to even try to do some of these ideas, I know we just covered them at a high level, even when you map everything out and Bill says, yeah, that's exactly what I want, when you get to the idea of actually putting it into to authoring it, that's what we like to say. We don't say develop in Tableau, we say you're an author, because again, you're writing. Is it may turn out that you say, oh, I don't need those features after all, or I want to use it in a different way. So you don't want to have to feel forced to say, well, that's what they said they wanted. Let's do exactly what they wanted. That's not the way it works. You don't want to feel like you're so locked in, because you may actually end up with something that's not as helpful.
So that and we did this for multiple of our dashboards, and then at that point, Lee had passed enough of his wisdom along to us so that we could kind of do it ourselves. And so now I'd like to take several minutes and take you through kind of a demo of what the final product looks like, and how much it has been improved. And at the same time, I'm going to highlight for you all of the different features of the embed APIs, whether it's the JavaScript API or the REST API that are being used in each of these areas. So I'm going to start with one of the things. This is Infinite Campus, and this is the way that school districts work. I'm going to go to all schools. This is where, if I'm in as a super admin, so I have access to everything. And one thing is that there seems to be a consensus that all access to dashboards should be like from a central location. We have the ability to scatter it throughout the product. So here we've built, everyone gets their own customizable homepage, okay? So in it, we control within, again, let's just talk for a second about the the way data is controlled. These products, all of them, whether it's Infinite Campus, Power School, Skyward, whatever, all have what we call tool and data rights that allow for control of who can see what. So a lot of times in districts, I'm an admin, I can see all schools, but if I work in just the high school, chances are I only get access to the high school calendar. So I only see data for students in those schools. Teachers are generally limited to only seeing data for students that are rostered into their sections that they teach. And the whole idea for us was to try to be able to flow all of those data security things down into the Tableau dashboards naturally. And embedding allows us to do that. So the other idea is you can build dashboards, but sometimes people have different diverse needs, and this allows them to basically build a dashboard homepage of their own if they want. I've got a couple here. Maybe I'm looking at behavior, looking at posted grades. This would be a quick view that you would come in and say, oh, what's going on in the 8th grade? There's 5 of those. These can contain single click-throughs, so now I can see what's going on. You'll see these will even reflow based upon where you are in the screen. And so if I click through, I can see what events and what do you get for gambling. You get in-school suspension, something like that. And this is all configurable by each individual user. Let me get myself back to 100%. And they can simply add additional if they want. And so this is a menu of all of the what we call minis that they have the choice of putting on their homepage, things like that. At the same time, they have access to all of the other dashboards that we've put in the system right here from this drop-down menu. So I'm going to jump into, if you will, for a second, the student demographics. And this is one where they made such a big deal out of dynamic parameters, right? This is an exact reason why. You do student enrollments, it's always got to be a as of what date. Now, normally you'd say as of today, but we found out when we put this up, people would go back and grab last year's calendars and say, I want to know my enrollment same time last year. With the default of today, you don't see any 12th graders or any kid that changed school. So what we ended up doing was setting this nonsensical, if you look, it's 1/1/1900, but it's easy enough to grab today. And now when I grab today, notice I have all schools selected here in this drop down. So I'm seeing all schools in my district. And just an interactive dashboard. If I select the high school, I can see all of the grades at the high school by count. I can see race, ethnicity, gender breakdown. But more importantly,
Hey, so can I say one thing here too?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing you might be seeing here is everything is very neutral. The colors are neutral. And that was a big conversation we had, especially because you saw how bright it was in the beginning. And the idea, and there's a balancing act here, but the idea is only when there's something that should really jump out at you, that's when you want to start to use some kind of, it could be a signal, it could be color or something else, so that it draws your attention to it. If you just say, oh, I want to have color because I want to make it look pretty, does anybody ever say that? Nobody raised their hand. Okay, good. That's not the reason to use color, because now someone might even think that's important when it's not. And so you would kind of reduce that, that understand. You want to simplify it so that you speed up the understanding that people are having of it.
so one of the other things that we did as far as now the embedding and taking advantage of the two products working with each other is, again, in this system, you use what are called ad hoc queries to pull lists of students for whatever. Every student information system has a facility like that for pulling data. And what this allows us to do is to access all of the ad hoc queries that I may have access to. And in this case, I have one that pulls free or reduced students. If you notice, I've got 1,400 students in my district, but when I pull the free or reduce, what it's doing now in the background is going into the student information system, running that query, returning a list of students, and then filtering the dashboard based upon it. So now you can see I've got 71 students. That's how many are free and reduced. I can see the demographic breakdown by school, whatnot, all done in the background.
Bill, you got a fan. He's clapping.
Someone that
He's
made
clapping.
someone happy. You can remove it just as well. And if I happen to only have rights to, let's say, the high school, that when I bring up this dashboard, I'm only going to see high school data because it's set up to automatically filter. All right, so now I only see one school. All right, so now what we're doing is we're allowing the student information system data security model to flow into Tableau, because one of the things we don't want all of our end users trying to do is managing 2 different security models in parallel. It's a lot of work that they don't want to have to do. So now I'll jump into showing you the early warning system as it lives in its final incarnation. And so as Lee mentioned, now we've got a system where you're first drawn to the students that are at most risk based upon, again, similar concept. It's a weighted average. You can change it. If you wanted to look at any of the individual scores, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see. If you want to look at any of the individual measures, those are available there. If I want to look at the attendance, just the attendance score, I can. But we show the total. And then when we select a student, let me add 100. Let me grab that student there. I can see details, all right? And it'll now show me, and actually I'm not at 100% because I got a gray bar. There we go. I can see details on the student. I can see the whole year. My Viz in the tooltip will give me a breakdown of all the attendance events by class, and those color codings are the color codings used in the student information system, so it's a familiar color palette. And then if I wanted to see them by term, I can see the same thing here. And now you can see each one of these is colored based upon the relative risk to everyone else in that term. So this is a bit of the history that we were talking about. Same thing for behavior. I can see everything in the year as well as what they did in each, and then as well posted grades, and I can see posted failing grades, none there. There we have some here. And I can see the course, the grading task, and the score, all there. So now, as an administrator, I have one place where I can quickly look at all the kids, but then drill down to see the details on one individual student. Our original version never gave us that ability to do that.
Yeah, and plus, if you remember way out in the beginning, he started on that early warning system, and then there was like a whole nother page behind that, and we pretty much were able to condense all of that into this one view, simplify it down as well to just the kind of the key elements that were really needed.
And for posterity, we did actually keep those other drill down pages available here. You can see the grades, behavior. You can still jump into those and see that data, but for the most part, you should be able to get everything you want right here. Now also notice, watch, when I unselect, notice here at the top in this bar, when I select a student, I get a menu that says, gives me a transfer to ad hoc and jump to. This is one of those marks listeners I was telling you about now with the JavaScript API. Whenever a mark is selected, it looks, was it an individual student or were there multiple students? And is there the key field needed to be able to identify that student? Because if it is, it'll give me the option to, okay, well, now I see information. I want to jump into the student information system and find out more data on that student. And this allows me to jump into there. And so I'm going to jump to a custom tab for that student. And of course, it has a Tableau dashboard. But now you can see that Jared Price is still the focus. And now I can see his assessments. And this is a dashboard that we built for visualizing his assessments. It lists all of their test scores. And then I have the ability to select a score and say, I want to see how that student did amongst their cohort. And when I do, I can see their score listed in blue. I can see the scale scores, I can see the result levels, and I can see the distribution of where they fell. Or furthermore, if I wanted to see how they did in a longitudinal year-over-year comparison, I can see that. Now the right-hand side shows the average score in each year's test administration, where the student fell relative to the average, and distribution. So it's an awful lot packed in there. This is a Tableau dashboard on a custom tab within the product, and this is something that is the focus of a student. So if I go to another student, let me just show you how that might work. Right, I'll go and just bring up a list of students, and I'll grab Peter here, and I've got this ELA math results. So here's another custom tab that's been put on, but you'll notice at the top right corner, it's got this Save PDF button. This is something that was actually implemented from user feedback, because this is what we'll call a portal dashboard. In this product, it allows you to expose these tabs to the portal. So when parents and students go in, they can see the dashboards for their students as well. And so whenever you see one that has a saved PDF, because that's a special feature that they wanted for parents to be able to see. So if you will, I'm going to jump into the portal as a parent. All right, so that was Peter Abate. I'm going to be dad. And when I log in, the extensible stuff is under More. And if I go to the ELA math results, you'll see that it comes up, but it's blank. Why? Because I need to select which student I want to see. This has a drop down of all the students for whom I have portal rights. And when I grab Peter, you'll see I see his data. And I also have assessment data for James. I pull it up. So now parents have the ability, and we can look at, whatever you want. I have another one, and whatever interactivity you build in, and that a custom tab will be available to the parents as well. So here's one where it's a graduation proficiency standards dashboard, which lists graduation standards across areas and the student's level of proficiency. But there's a bunch of different views that they can look at. This is a heat map or a tree showing where they're proficient, where they're not, and the whites haven't even been addressed. Or it's what I like to call a standards transcript, where it shows you by term and year the standard, their proficiency, and each of the classes that they were assessed in, and what the course was and what their proficiency was. So nice thing on the portal, the parents want to save it, print it, put it on the fridge, whatever. They just hit save as PDF. This is just using JavaScript call from the API to be able to dump that PDF out. I'm not going to do that. So let me come back in. I'm going to be a teacher now. And so if I log in as a teacher, you'll notice a teacher, the interface in the product looks a little bit different for teachers, and the extensibility is over here. But I go to my data dashboards, and now teachers get their own homepage as well. And in this case, I teach 5 classes, so I've chosen to put a view of my grade books on each of these. So I've got my math moments, section 1, English for all, section 3, social studies. You see, I'm a very versatile teacher. I have coverage of all topics. But more importantly, it shows the student's grade, and it shows how much it has changed in whatever the time period you're interested in, which is available right here. I also have the ability to say, I only want to see students whose in-progress grade has decreased by more than 10%. So now as a teacher, I can use this as a way to quickly come in and look at my class and say, ooh, what's going on with that student? When I select it, I can see their in-progress grade history, and I can see how it's changed over time. And when I hover, I can see each individual assignment and what they got on it, and you can see the overall impact on the student's in-progress grade. If I'm a teacher also, I only have rights to a few of the dashboards. Again, so it's the tool rights from the product flow through to the dashboard system. So in this case, I've got one that shows teacher scored assessments.
So let me just, can you go back to that one? 'Cause I just want to show them. Let me see.
Sure, well, I'll show you how you can navigate back and forth, or they just go right back to the
Just to
homepage.
point something out, because I talked about color before. So if you're, something you might see typically when you use arrows, right? A green arrow is up, or a red arrow is down. And you can see that they've decided to use blue and reds here. So it fixes that problem of the green and red, and that's something that they use consistently throughout all of the applications, so that when somebody looks at it, they know what that means.
Right. And you'll see it here as well. These are teacher scored assessments. It's a monthly assessment in my English. Oh, you know what I need to do though? I need to make sure when I come in here that I'm in my middle school, because I'm a middle school teacher as well. And there we go. And now when I go to my dashboards, you'll see that it'll bring up when I come to here, it knows that I'm a teacher, and it lists all of the sections that I teach. And so you can see this drop down. I only have access to the sections of the students that are rostered in the sections I teach, right? And so then I can go in and I can select multiple. I can see the class average, and I can do side-by-side comparisons. If I want to just see the big, teachers love big colorful tables of numbers. So here's the big colorful table of numbers. But at the same time, I've got similar tests in my social studies class. So when I change it, you'll see that now it will re-render for all of the data in the social studies class. So the teachers just works like all the other tools where they select their class, they get the dashboard for that. Let me go back to, I'm going to go back into the product as the super admin, just so I can show you more stuff. And this is now going to touch on other features of the API and how the integration works. So here's one we call our assessment inventory. And one of the things that we do with our API is we convert Tableau tabs into Infinite Campus tabs. So you publish a dashboard with multiple tabs, and as you can see here, this one has a number. But also see what happened there? When I zoomed in, when I'm out full screen, they all fit across. The Infinite Campus application has a tab manager already. We wanted to make it look and feel like the rest of the product. So you notice when I zoom in, it will wrap multiple rows, but those are still Tableau tabs. If I go and click on the tallies by year, you will see that I get the other side of the dashboard. So that's a nice thing. And then we have a tab switch listener implemented out of the JavaScript API for that. The other thing that we can do is, if I come in here under assessments, we've got a dashboard that shows how a student did in a posted grade in a class versus how they did on the assessment aligned with that class. So a lot of states have end of course assessments, things like that. This allows me to say, all right, well, here's the course grade. It's a sophomore English. So when I select that, it brings up all of the assessment data for students that have that sophomore English grade. When I select the test, now I can see how the student did on that. This is like an end of course English test. I can see what the student did on the assessment, what the student got in the course, so I can see whether there's a correlation, whether you get grade inflation in the course or not. But more importantly, we've got a marks listener, so that, let's say I select these down here. Well, sure, it'll show me who those students were, but this may be something where I want to talk to the guidance counselor, get them extra help, something like that. You'll notice when I selected them, I got this transferred to ad hoc, which allows me to take that collection of students and save it in the student information system side of things. When I hit it, it says, do you want to send them to the ad hoc? When I say yes, actually, you know what, let me cancel because I really need to be in my high school. I forgot to jump over there. And now when I do it, you'll see that it'll actually create the ad hoc query for that, and you'll see all of those students, and they're saved, and they can be used elsewhere. So I do that, right? I click off to here, I grab that. Let me just grab these students. All right, let me transfer that to ad hoc. Go ahead, yep. There's those students that I selected. They're right there, saved. I can jump into the product. I can look at other things on them. More importantly, I can, let me just jump back to my home page for a second and show you, like, let's go back to the student demographics. I'm in the high school. If I pull it up, you can see everyone in the high school, but with this overlay ad hoc, when I pull this in, you'll see now there's a new search, a new ad hoc called Tableau generated search. When I select that, we go from 315 kids to 7, because those are the 7 I selected. So it's got it saved. Now I've got that list I can use throughout the product. So that's Tableau now sending data to the SIS. And we go back and forth that way. Other things that we do, when you implement these systems, you want to know how they're being used, right? Tableau server has nice logging capability, but they have to log in. They're kind of nerdy logs. So what we did, we have a system where we're using trusted authentication. So every time you click, basically the SIS goes over to the Tableau server and says, hey, user J Smith wants to see a viz. Are they worthy? And Tableau server looks, says, yes, they have an account currently active, they can see it. And so we have an opportunity to capture that data. And so we do, and we log it in our dashboard usage log, which down here under the admin area, see we've got a whole lot of different features here. We have a lot of documentation, but if you look at the dashboard usage log, this will show us now right here in the product, usage by date, by user. This is a combination of unique views versus number of times, unique users versus the number of times it's been viewed, and the dashboard. And again, if I select, a date, I can see who was looking at what, when. If I look at a dashboard, I can see who was looking at it, when, things like that. So it's a nice thing for administrators to be able to monitor. So when a teacher says, yeah, I looked at that, it wasn't very useful, they say, yeah, you looked at it once, 3 weeks ago, and you never looked again. And then the other things that we've done is try to share the knowledge that Lee bestowed upon us, is like what are good guidelines, good practices. So we actually provide to all of our users now this dashboard design guidelines worksheet, which allows for showing things like, color for emphasis, right? And you'll notice red, white, and blue here. And they can jump in, and it's an actual Tableau workbook though. So if they see it when they're building, they can just download this and then open the workbook and see how it's done. So it's a nice thing there. And
yeah,
then,
so think about that if you're thinking about data literacy, the way we like to describe it as grammar is fundamental, right? When you're learning how to write. And this is the rules of grammar for when anybody, whether Bill's team or his customers are using this platform to do some of their own work in it, that they continue to follow those, because especially if his customers want to do their own customization and they start changing things up, then the product starts to get really messy again.
And then two last features I wanted to show you that are pretty cool. The link manager, in order to put this stuff in to the product, you kind of have to know where it lives on the Tableau server. And it means jumping back and forth. What we did was we built this tool, and you'll notice when I come in here and I click here, you see I've got a spinny kind of weight, and what that's basically doing right now is I've got an AJAX call, which is an asynchronous JavaScript call that's going out using the Tableau REST API and indexed all of the content on my Tableau server. So now, if I wanted to put like I have a bus routes dashboard. I want to put the bus routes and I want to put it under there's a data viz demo for the drop down. And now you can see I can see my projects and it's in my default project. And then if I scroll down, I can see all of the workbooks in that project. Here's bus routes. And then when I look, I can see what worksheets are available or dashboards. I select it. I can see a little preview of it. I want to filter it automatically by calendar ID. I want to overlay ad hoc. And I hit save. And now that has been added to the product. And with Infinite Campus, you have to log off and log in, but it's easy as doing that. And now if you look at this in the dropdown, I've got right here in the dropdown bus routes. So that's how easy it is to add. And then finally, the web data connector. We didn't really show that. If you're in Tableau, like I said, it can be a real challenge, 2,500 tables, to find all of the data you want. But districts are great at building ad hocs. And ad hoc is, just returns a reportable data set. So we've built an ad hoc data connector, which allows for you to log right into the SIS from Tableau Desktop. So I'm going to go in as Mr. Admin. It'll log me in. It now knows my tool rights. It knows who I am and what I have access to. So it shows me what school year. I'm going to grab the 1920 school year. I'm going to grab all calendars. And I have an ad hoc called active student demos, right? So it's all the current active students. I can now do that. It'll go out. It'll query the student information system, bring that data set back. Here it is. So now, and it creates an extract. So now I can jump into the sheet. And just as a quick demo to show how easy it is, number of records, we'll go by school. There it is, right? If I wanted to go by grade, number of records, and let's do one when I always turn on mark labels. So let's do one more by gender. Let's do gender. And of course, when we do gender, we normally do percent of total. So we'll do a quick table calculation, percent of total. And then let's make a really quick dashboard so I can take, sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3. Actually, I wanted that one down there. I wanted this one up here. And easy enough to turn on. There. Uses filter, right? Uses filter. And now, like the student demos I've shown, so now if I grab the high school, there's your grades at the high school. Grab males, there's your male distribution, all from an ad hoc. I didn't have to go into the database at all. So it's a nice thing. And that really pretty much takes us to the end with 1:45 to spare. So we've shown you a lot of things. Tried to highlight one of the other things, consistency. All of our dashboards have this information button here to tell you what you're looking at. And when you go to any of the dashboards, they also have that button available, and it tells you what data are you looking at, where does it come from in the product, and how do you use it. And we have that consistency with all of our dashboards. Again, as Lee says, so that someone can come in and just start using it without having to have an instruction manual. But again, because it's a full product, we do have an instruction manual for it, and that's all also embedded right here And we've got an API manual, we have a library manual, and whatnot. So the last point then we want to get to is it's a product. And if you're going to look to do this, a couple things to remember. The product should make someone's life easier, do their job better, faster, right? Second thing, you have to make sure that you have resources available for ongoing support and maintenance, because when people start using it, they don't always use it right, they ask for help, they need help. That's what that is. And then finally, one of the things that we found is most important is staying continuously engaged with your users and your clients to make sure that they're using it. They'll happily ask you questions if you give them any opportunity, but everyone's busy. If you give it to them, walk away, they use it for a day or two, they walk away, they don't use it. So if you stay engaged, they do better with the product in an ongoing manner. That takes us to the end. Any questions? This is contact info if anyone wants to reach either Lee or I in the future, whatnot. And again, everyone has the survey slides. Any questions? Yep.
So is that is Tableau using the same data source as the ISS?
Okay, so the question was, how's the marks listener working as far as the data that it's looking at when a mark is selected? I mean, we've got, it's all of the data fields that you would have, you know, when you built your dashboard worksheet, they're available in the API, and what that marks listener does is it looks at, was one or multiple marks selected, because that keys different things. And then it looks at the data, says, is there, the field is called person ID, which is what we use to identify individuals. Is there a person ID field available? Because if there is, then I can do this other cool stuff. If there isn't, those buttons don't even show up. And if there's one, then it says, well, you can also do that jump to thing, but if it's multiple, you can't jump to multiple students at once. So it has a whole lot of logic built in, but it's just using, so it's the data that's been read into the workbook, whether it's from the database and ad hoc, whatever your data source is. So it is a student information system data, but it's coming out of the database from the read of the Tableau workbook. Yeah, that answer? Any other questions? No. Well, thank you all for attending the final session of TableauCon TC19. I hope you all had a great conference. I hope you all have safe travels home to wherever you're returning. Thank you all.